Good morning. We're on test Yudamid base 10b. And yesterday we mentioned that because of Tamar's modesty, she merited to have kings and prophets descend from her. And the kings, of course, is the line of David, all the way down to Amziah. And then the further descendants too, including Mashiach, God willing, soon. And we had Amziah's brother, which therefore also comes from the line of David and thus from the line of Tamar. And this brother is Amos, father of Isaiah. Rashi stated that Amos himself was a Navi, was a prophet. And we had asked if anybody knows of any mention of him engaging as a prophet. So Rabbi Gimple emailed, I imagine using the Concordinita, told me that there's how many times? 12 or so times. I'll look at his email in a second. 13 times where Amos is mentioned, but only in the context of being the father of Isaiah. So we'll have to revert back to what we said yesterday, that presumably Rashi is telling us Amos himself was a prophet. So that way there's prophets, plural, not just kings, otherwise it would just be one Isaiah. And we'll have to also say, as we explained yesterday, that as we know, there are schools of prophets besides for those prophets who are quoted in scripture. And it's very possible that Amos is one of these members of the schools of prophets. He also noted that in Medrash, it states that Amos is the man of God referred to in Divrei Hayamim Chronicles, who is the brother of Amziah and cautioned Amziah about a certain action that he was doing anyway. Okay. Another thing I wanted to share that dawned on me sometime yesterday, we had this connection between modesty and kings and prophets. So we had suggested yesterday the connection is that in order to be a proper king, a proper ruler, one has to have a certain sense of modesty and humility, something we learned about in previous Gemaras as well. But perhaps also there's actually a prohibition that a king should not have too many horses, not too much gold and silver, right? Even though the king has certain, first of all, the king has to, because of who he represents the kingdom, he represents God, he has to have a certain sense of strength, like you were describing yesterday. At the same time, he has to have modesty. He's not allowed to have too many horses, not allowed to have it's a prohibition. Not allowed to have too many wives, not to be too opulent. So he does have to retain some modesty. Coming back to this king's forebearer, Tamar, who merited these kings for her modesty.
King Solomon, I guess, had some issues with that.
Yes, indeed. as did others. Yeah. Okay, so now the Gemara gets back to the story of Tamar herself, when Tamar met Yehuda. So the verse reads, it's about a quarter from the top of the page. The first word is havu, the second word is he, and there should be a little 3 next to the word he. A little 3, little number 3. Or maybe it's a gimel in your book.
Yeah.
Gimel. So the verse reads.
I'm sorry, those line numbers and footnotes?
Those tell us where the source of the verse is. So on the side of on the margin of the page, they quote the full verse that they're about to quote in the Gemara. So the verse reads, "He mutzas," she is found, as it were, right? And there she tells her father, she sends a message, or she was brought forth. Yeah. So the she was brought forth, she was found, and there she tells the court, or she sends a message to her father-in-law, whoever owns these, referring to the 3 things that he gave her earlier, the stick, the ring, and the cloak, which they're going to talk about in a minute. And she sends a message saying, whoever this belongs to, that's who the one that's who the father of this child is. That's who I was with, which of course was Yehuda himself, and he confessed. So, but the verse reads, "Hu mutzas," and the Gemara.
How did how did he find out that she was in court? Was he present in
Oh,
court?
people came to him and said, your daughter-in-law is pregnant, so she must have misbehaved. And Yehuda was not happy and said, bring her to court. And they were going to judge her to be
So
burned.
he was in the court at the time she presented the,
It seems like she was there.
he was there?
Yeah, although the verse reads, he shalcha l'chamia. She sent a message to her father-in-law, so maybe he wasn't actually there. I don't know if he was actually there present.
But he found out, obviously, through that message.
Through that message, he could discover that was him. It was him because she said, these belong to you. Oh, she said, whoever these belong to, that's the father. Okay, so the verse reads, he mutzas. She was found, or she was brought forth. The Gemara asks, mitutzas mi boile. The word mutzas sounds like she is finding something. Whereas the context is she is the one being found. She's the one being brought forth. She's the object, not the, what's the word? She's not the one doing the finding. She's the one that's being found, right? But the implication is, or the wording is, sounds like she found something. So what's going on here? As the Gemara asks, mitutzas mi boile. It should have said more explicitly in the correct grammar that she was brought forth, like she was brought out. She was, like the word could mean found, or also mean, like here probably comes from the word say, which means to go out, but not that.
Like brought to trial?
Yeah, she was brought forth to trial. So it should have, so she's the one that's being found. She's the one that's she's being brought out by others, not that she herself is doing the finding, or that she herself is coming out. So the phrasing is interesting. And if the Gemara says, it should have said she was being brought forth.
Maybe it's both. Maybe
So the Gemara's going to explain.
Initially, she was brought forth, but then she brought out the.
Let's see. Well, that comes later in the verse, not yet. This is describing her coming forth. So Amar Belezer explains to use this word mutzas, which really translates in this context as being brought out, to also be finding, right? Finding and brought out are related terms, right? Something is found, is brought to light, is brought out. Yeah. So she was brought out, or she was found, kind of thing. But now we're talking, let's just say she actually did some finding as well. So what did she find? So Amar Belezer says, after she found her signs, she found her proof. These 3 items.
Why, she didn't have them?
Well, I guess she collected them and found them and brought them. But what happened was, Samael, which is the angel of the kingdom of Edom, right? Where's our Rashi here? Where's Rashi? Yeah, the Samael is the angel of Edom, who eventually will get stricken down by the offspring of Tamar, King David. Right? So Samael, the angel of Edom, does not want Tamar to be what's the word? Exonerated. He would rather if Tamar would actually die and didn't give birth to this child.
So she's trying to suppress the evidence.
Samael is trying to suppress the evidence tampering. So Samael distanced the objects from her, so she couldn't find them. Now, Ba Gavriel came the angel Gavriel. It's an angel on behalf of the Jewish people. They caravan and brought them back to her. So there's like this spiritual battle.
There's like 2 courtrooms going on.
Yes, so exactly. There's a physical courtroom going on down here in this world. Then there's a spiritual courtroom. And there's a spiritual battle going on between the representatives of good, the Jewish people, the representatives of the oppressors of the Jewish people, of Edom. And there's a battle going on. And it would seem from the simple reading of the Gemara that this battle has physical effect. Can she find her evidence or not find her evidence? So Samael is trying to make the evidence be distant from her. She can't find them. And Gavriel brings it back so she can find them. Okay, so I'm translating the Gemara literally, and of course, the floor is open for deeper understanding. Let's first continue reading what the Gemara has to say. So Hainu Diksiv, this is the meaning of the verse, which reads in Tehillim. King David says, Lam Natseyach, a psalm. Lam Natseyach means a psalm or a song. Al Yonas Elam Rechaikim, on Yonat Elam Rechaikim, which seemingly is just the name of a location where the psalm is being written. And LaDavid, to David, a michtam, a song or a psalm, another word for psalm or song, right? So that's the simple reading, right? Or let me check for the leader, yeah. So they translated here, yeah. So for the leader, for David, on this place called Yonas Elam Rechakim, there's a psalm for David, and the verse goes on. Okay, which psalm is it? Let's look at the side. It's Psalm 56. It's the opening chapter, opening verse. Okay, so Amar Rabbi Yochanan says that this word Yonas Elam Rechakim, which is the location, can also be translated as follows: when King David's ancestor Tamar lost her evidence, it was distanced from her by Samael. Then Nasis Keyonas Ilam, she became like a silent dove. She's stuck there without her evidence.
There's no case.
Sorry?
Her case is now
That's right. She's like silent. But that too is a virtue. That she didn't just come forth and blame Yehuda outright, as we're going to see.
Right.
And therefore, LeDavid Michtam, therefore to King David there's a psalm. Now this word Michtam can be split into two words. The first two letters, Mach, and the second two letters, Tam. And therefore, as a result of her being silenced like a dove, what she had to endure, losing her evidence and remaining silent like a dove, to Yona Elemet, which is the first two words of that location, Yonas Elam. And that happened when, right, the location described for this psalm is Yonas Elam Rechakim. So Yonas is a dove, Yona. Elam is silent or mute, a mute dove. And that happened because of Rechakim, because of distance, which is a translation of that word, because of the time when her evidence was distanced. And as a result of that, LeDavid Michtam, from David comes a psalm, but the word Michtam coming from two words, Machtam. So let's see. She yatzeh mena, as a result of her silence at the moment when she lost her evidence, Yonas Elam Rechakim. So there emerged from her, David, Shaya Mach Vitam. King David, that was both Mach and Tam. Mach is someone who's like humble, as Rashi translates it, and Tam means someone who's wholesome and honest in his dealings. So because of her silence like a dove, her progeny, David, also has this quality of humility and wholesomeness. Again, these are very related qualities to modesty, right? Because there's modesty, there's two parts to modesty, right? There's the literal modesty of the body. You have to cover certain parts of your body, which applies to men as equally as it does to women, in that any part of the body that is ordinarily covered ought to remain covered. In fact, by the way, just in parentheses, one of the halachic backings for the yarmulke, it's primarily custom, and there's a whole discussion about this. And one year at our Torah conference, one of the boys did a presentation on that, and it's on our YouTube channel, did a presentation on the history of different halachic elements of the kippah, of the yarmulke. But one of the reasons is because it's a part of the head that's become covered by custom of wearing a kippah, and because it's something which is ordinarily covered, therefore it must remain covered. That's the laws of tznius. The laws of modesty are that anything which is ordinarily covered must remain covered. And because by custom we wear a kippah, so now it has to remain covered by tznius, that's the law of modesty. Right? The custom turned law because of tznius. All to say that there's the halacha of the physical body of tznius, that there have to be certain parts of the body covered. But then there is not modesty simply of the body, in that my physical body is covered, but modesty of character. Modesty of character, knowing when to speak and when not to speak, knowing when, speaking in a soft voice when appropriate, and, rarely raising one's voice, God forbid, but even so, only in proper context, right? If necessary, for educational reasons, or, passionate Torah discussion can sometimes raise one's voice. But the point is there's not just the modesty of the body, but there's the modesty of the personality, a modest personality. In Yiddish, the word is edel, which means like refined or sublime, someone who looks a little bit more, not so crass. Even the words you choose to speak, you talk about certain things, and you want to make reference to something negative, don't be so explicit about it. You can speak more subtly. Deborah was very careful on this. Would very often not use or I can't say never, but would really use the word bad. It would say that which is not so good, or they didn't refer to people as secular, disengaged people. It would refer to Jews as those who are not aware of the beauty of Judaism yet. A certain, in Yiddish, again, use this word edelkeit, a certain modesty, not just of the dress, but modesty of personality, of the way one talks, when one does and when doesn't. And that's kind of, I think, this idea of mach and tam, where King David is both wholesome and this word tam and mach, anav, right? Which connects back to the modesty talked about before, which is Tamar becoming like a silent dove being this beautiful bird, but silent, even though she has plenty to say. She has lots to say here. She knows the history of exactly what happened there. She can point fingers at King David and cause a ruckus, right? But as we're going to learn soon, she doesn't do that. She's a silent dove. So modest, not just in her physical dress, as we learned yesterday, she covered her face, but also in her personality, and not talking even when she has what to say. What are we going to say?
She narrated, her character narrated that her character traits.
That's right. So her characters, that's correct. Her character traits projected into her lineage. And she had a grandson, Machvatam. So I want to highlight also this word tam. So it's interesting, like in Haggadah, we use the word tam to describe the simple son. So it isn't used necessarily in the positive term there. He's a simple son, at least at the surface. So the Pesach Haggadah, but in the four sons, you have the wise, the wicked, the simple one, and the one who doesn't know how to ask. So it's off, and that's the Hebrew word for that simple son is tam. And as I just translated it, which is normal translation, tam is the simple one. But we also have in the verse, we refer to Yaakov, our forefather Jacob, as Yaakov ish tam. He's a man of wholesomeness. And this is simplicity in the virtuous sense. Not to be convoluted, complex with all kinds of needs and chips on the shoulder and baggage in this. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's honest. And in this sense, it's simple in the virtuous sense, not simple in the God forbid, negative sense, which, by the way, many commentaries on the Haggadah point to the Tam as being on a high level for that reason. Many of the commentaries. He's someone who's wholesome, he's honest, he's straightforward. Just because I'm here, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I really love this teaching from the Abarbanel on the four sons. He says like this, that the wise, wicked, simple, and doesn't know how to ask is not a description of their capacity, but a description of why they're asking questions. So the wise son is asking questions because he wants to prove how wise he is. So he asks this question to show off how much he knows. And then the wicked one is asking questions because he wants to, antagonize. Why do you guys do these things? So exactly. They may all know the answers, right? But the wise one is asking a question and wants to show off his wisdom, and the wicked one's asking this question because he wants to antagonize. And therefore, the simple son is really the highest here, because he asks the question because he's simply and honest, doesn't know. I'm honest, straightforward. I don't know. Could you please explain to me? So it's simple, yes, but it's also honesty in the virtuous sense. I'm not trying to make a point. I'm not trying to argue. I'm here to learn. Please tell me what the Seder is about. I'm not embarrassed by not knowing, and I'm not afraid to ask. I'm not trying to make a point. I simply just want to know, which is the virtuous sense. And the one who doesn't have how to ask, he doesn't say this explicitly, but elsewhere it's explained this. This is even higher. It's like, you want to tell me? Tell me. You don't want to tell me? I'm not going to ask either. It's just complete silence. You don't want to tell me? Fine, also good, even at the highest level. Anyway, I'm just saying this because of this word tam, describing King David in the virtuous sense as a grandchild of Tamar, who was silent in the face of losing her evidence. A silent dove just remained a beautiful, dignified, poised silence. And thus, her grandchild is machvatam, honest, straightforward, uncomplicated, modest of personality, and humble.
She was in a very dangerous situation.
In a very dangerous situation, which we're going to learn about.
People would have snitched out.
So we're going to learn about that tomorrow, how incredible it is that she remained silent. Okay. But for now, let's learn a few more lines related to this understanding of the word michtam, and two more interpretations, which the third interpretation certainly connects to what we just said, and maybe The second one also does, and we'll have the floor open to see if anybody can tie this all together. Okay, davar acher, another way of understanding the word michtam. Right, so we're reading the verse now. Lam Natsayach al Yones Elam Rechaikim. This Lam Natsayach, this song, comes on Yones Elam Rechaikim. We translated those three words, which literally is just the location, but we translated Yonas to mean the dove, the Yonah, Elam, who's silent, that was Tamar, Rechaikim, meaning distant, because her evidence became distant. So she was a silent dove when she lost her evidence. And as a result of that, La David, her grandson David, Michtam became a Michtam. Michtam literally means a psalm, but we're using the word Michtam as a description of King David. And the first description is breaking this word into two, machtam, humble and honest and straightforward and complete, as Rashi says. Shalom, tamim b'drachav is complete and wholesome.
So Tom means simple.
Simple, but it also means wholesome, right? Which is what we were explaining before. This connection between the two translations.
And
Mach Rashi translates as humble. Mach. Okay, so now there's another interpretation to the word michtam. What the greatness of King David being born from Tamar, who was silent, even when her evidence is taken from her, like the silent dove. So davar acher, where I lost my place. Here we are. Davar acher, another interpretation to the word michtam. Shaisa makosai tama. So he translates the word michtam, the first two letters mem chaf as, or the first three letters really, mem chaf taf as makat, as in like a strike. A bruise. And then the last two letters, tam, means complete. His affliction was complete. Okay, what affliction is complete? So explains the Gemara. Shenoilad, he was born, kishuhumal, already having born with a circumcision already. Right? The circumcision is a bruise. Quite literally. Right? So his bruise was wholesome. I think he was born with already David, born already circumcised. Now, in parentheses, I should note, in Jewish law, if this were to happen, you'd still have to draw blood, right? Which is why this happens, unfortunately. You know, if someone does their circumcision in a hospital and not done with the proper blessings and proper time and proper everything, then later in life one has to draw a little blood. But nonetheless, a person being born already circumcised is a very lofty level. In fact, this idea is used with respect to women. That a woman is born already circumcised by Hashem, if she doesn't need any circumcision. So whereas the male needs to temper his actions because by nature, things are not the way it's supposed to be. So it's symbolic, the physical bris, to temper our misgivings. Woman is born complete, doesn't need that. She's already born wholesome, therefore doesn't need that. And King David is similar. And he's born wholesome, doesn't need any fixing. He's already born with his bris. So perhaps this is connected to what we said before, that he's already born with this modesty, right? The opposite of modesty is to have too many, for lack of no pun intended, too many trimmings, you know, showing off too much, you know, and you got to peel back some of the edges to roll it back in, so that you're a little bit more modest in the personality. And therefore, maybe that's what the bris here means also. As in, like, he's born with the bris, he already has all those things that show off with. He's already born without the need to do that. So maybe that's the connection here, that he's born already with a circumcision. But the last one is certainly connected. Davar acher, another translation of the word michtam, right? As a result of his grandmother Tamar being silent like a dove, King David is a michtam. So what does michtam mean? Michtam kishem shebekat nusa hikn atzmai, just as a youngster, before he became king, he humbled himself. Before that, who was greater than him? Before he became king, actually doesn't explain how and where, but maybe this means to King Saul. I don't know. Actually doesn't say exactly. Actually says before he became king, he humbled himself before those who were greater. It's specifically Lilma Torah to study Torah. And he's younger, he wants to learn. So he's humbling himself before those who know more than him. So Kach likewise, Bekat Lusai, even they became great And even as he was king, he would still humble himself before those who knew more than him. We actually learned this in Sanhedrin, where he would discuss with his teacher even after he became king, and he would give rulings. He would first discuss with his teacher if my ruling is correct, even though his knowledge was impeccable, Torah knowledge. He would still consult with his teacher. We had this in Gemara and Sanhedrin. Remember that? So maybe that's what you're referencing here too as well. In that even as he became king and he's in a position of leadership and he's in a position of everybody can learn him, he still had the humility to learn from those who were greater. We also have it in Pirkei Avos where he says, that's right, in Pirkei Avos he says he learned one thing from Achi Seifel, right? And you refer to him as Rabbi Aluf Miyudai, my teacher, my master, the one who informs me, even though he only learned one thing, and he's king. So this humility was with him consistently from childhood all the way to even being king. And Rashi explains what does that have to do with Michtam. So Rashi says, Tamar Makasai. He was wholesome in his
well.
No, not Ashray. Makasai, maybe come Mekitai, like he was wholesome in his learning. I'm not sure exactly how Rashi translates. I'm missing a detail there. Rashi. Yeah, well, actually, Rashi says no, that he was complete in like his lack of mistakes from beginning to end, and that's expressed in his humility to learn from those who are greater, which is interesting because the Gemara doesn't say anything about his lack of mistakes, but Rashi does say that from the beginning to end, he's like his not sins. He never lost his humility. From beginning to end, he never lost his humility. But I'm not sure what the word makase comes in there.
I was learning.
And maybe someone's watching can help me here. Tam makase was wholesome in his makkah from beginning to end, and he never lacked humility and was always able to learn from those who are greater than him. So this all I think ties in this idea of being not just modest in clothing, which we learned about yesterday, covering our face, but also modest in personality, being open to listen to other people, knowing when to speak, when not to speak, knowing what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And you don't have to show off everything you have. You're born with the circumcision, right? Dial that in. Not everybody to know everything you have.
Also, humility from those who do less than him, right? Is that what it says in Pirkei Avos?
He learned one thing from somebody, yeah.
Not to be arrogant. Oh, I'm not going to want to him.
Yeah.
Know very much.
It's funny you say that. Yeah, what do you say?
I was learning, also speaking of Pirkei Avos, I was learning yesterday that it's a judge a man, the kiso, kaso, the koso. Judge a man with three ways in his drink and in his anger and in his.
Yeah, it's not really related to this. Maybe.
Kaso is not the same word.
No, that's with an ayin. It's an ayin and a samach. Chaf ayin samach. This is makase with makat. Mem chaf taf. Like a bruise or like a
hit. Yeah.
Yeah, makkah. It's a different word. But I was going to say that you're talking about learning from everybody. So I'll conclude with this thought. So I have a friend who today is a teacher in Chicago. So we once vibrating and chatting, and he told me an interesting thought. The Rebbe once talked about this idea a number of times, but once very forcefully talked about this idea that every Jew should be a mashpia. Every Jew should be an influencer. Use modern term. Every Jew should be an influencer. Every Jew has their sphere of influence, whether it be their family, their work, themselves, whatever it is. Everybody has their sphere of influence, and you should be a positive influencer on your surroundings. So my friend says there's two reactions you might have to this talk. One is the Rebbe saying everybody's got to be an influencer. Okay, so let me find my sphere of influence and start having a positive impact, right? In an appropriate manner with the modesty described here. Another way of thinking about this is, another reaction might be is every Jew is an influencer. So I'm going to go from Jew to Jew and say, please teach me, please teach me, please teach me. What can you teach me? What can you teach me? It's the same talk, and they're both correct attitudes, but you see a whole different perspective. If every Jew is an influencer, then every Jew has something to teach me, right? So I'm humbled before every Jew who's capable of influencing me in some positive manner. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. It has to be one or the other.
The person who's asking that isn't doing any influencing himself.
That's what I'm saying. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. But the point being is that if the reaction is I'm an influencer to the exclusion of everybody else, you're running into a problem. So it's true I'm an influencer, but so is that guy. And therefore, if he can learn something from me, I can learn something from him too.
You're an influencee.
Exactly. If every Jew is an influencer, then so is my fellow Jew. Even the Jew I'm influencing can teach me something.
Right.
Because he's also a Jew who's an influencer, right? So I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but I think that very much ties into what we're talking about here in this sort of modesty of personality, allowing you to be open to learn from others. As King David, even as a king, he can decide and off with someone's head. He's king. He still has the humility to learn from those who he can learn from. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Everybody, and God willing, tomorrow we'll get more into Tamar's silence and the incredible nature of her silence and what that actually meant to her.
She didn't snitch.
She didn't snitch. Yeah.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful lecture. At the same time, the silence.
I'm sorry. 1 second, Judge. 1 second.